The air in the small apartment above the written word was a perpetual blend of aged paper, settled dust, and the faint, sweet decay of forgotten ink. It clung to the worn upholstery of Leo Maxwell's armchair, seeped into the threads of his threadbare rug, and became a silent, comforting companion to his solitary existence. Sunlight, when it managed to penetrate the grimy window panes, cast long, hazy shafts that illuminated the endless motes dancing in the stillness. His home was less a curated living space and more an extension of the struggling bookstore below, a repository of stories waiting to be read, or in Leo's case, to be painstakingly repaired. His evenings unfolded with a predictable, almost ritualistic calm. The hum of the old refrigerator, a steady, low thrum, was often the loudest sound in the small kitchen as Leo prepared his dinner. It was almost always the same instant ramen noodles, their savory steam curling upward, momentarily fogging his spectacles. He ate them from a chipped ceramic bowl, perched on a stool at a tiny, wobbly table. The only other company he had was the rhythmic clatter of distant city traffic, a muffled symphony that hinted at lives lived beyond his quiet walls, lives he rarely intersected. He was a creature of habit, and his habits spoke volumes of a life unburdened by social obligations or the clamor of a bustling family. There were no voices echoing from a past dinner, no footsteps suggesting a loved one's return. Just Leo, the noodles, and the ever-present scent of old books. After dinner, the true work began, the work that consumed his soul and provided a quiet balm to his spirit. He moved to his workbench, a battered wooden table pushed against the far wall, piled high with fragile, decaying volumes. His slender fingers, surprisingly strong despite their delicate appearance, picked up a crumbling spine or a detached cover. This was where he found his purpose, his quiet artistry. He possessed an almost preternatural patience, a meticulous precision that transformed tattered pages into coherent narratives once more. Each carefully applied dab of pH-neutral glue, each measured press of a linen hinge, was a small act of resurrection. He would lose himself in the task, the hours slipping away as he mended tears, rebound loose pages, and cleaned the grime of decades from forgotten covers. He wasn't just fixing books, he was restoring memories, preserving voices from the past. And in their silent company, his own loneliness, though never articulated, seemed to lessen. He often read excerpts aloud to himself, his voice a low murmur, bringing the characters to life in the quiet solitude of his apartment. They were his only connection to the outside world, these fictional companions, their triumphs and tragedies echoing faintly in his own unassuming life. One particularly blustery Tuesday evening, the wind howled around the corners of the building, rattling the old window panes. Rain lashed against the glass, blurring the streetlights into hazy halos. Leo was hunched over a particularly challenging restoration, a first edition of The Great Gatsby. Its cover severely water-damaged, its pages brittle. The aroma of damp paper filled the air, mingling with the ever-present scent of dust and old ink. He paused, stretching his cramped fingers. A flicker of movement caught his eye through the rain-streaked window. Below, on the bus stop bench directly across from the bookstore, a figure huddled, small and seemingly fragile against the onslaught of the weather. It was a young woman, no older than his early 20s, her frame shivering uncontrollably beneath a thin, tattered blanket. Her head was bowed, hair plastered to her face, a silent testament to the raw brutality of the night. A pang, sharp and insistent, pierced through Leo's quiet absorption. He knew the feeling of being exposed, of being alone in the cold. It wasn't the bitter chill of the outside air that troubled him, but the stark, unforgiving indifference of the world. He glanced at his half-eaten sandwich, forgotten on the workbench, and then at a warm, unused scarf that had been left in the bookstore's lost and found for weeks. It was a soft, hand-knitted thing, a vibrant splash of crimson against the dull gray of the street. His own finances were always tight, a constant tightrope walk between paying rent and keeping the lights on. Yet, the thought of the young woman shivering, perhaps without a meal, was more chilling than any cold draft. Without a moment's hesitation, he pushed back his chair. He scooped up the sandwich and the scarf, quickly pulling on his worn, but thick, jacket. Slipping quietly out of the bookstore's back entrance, he walked swiftly through the driving rain, his head bowed against the wind. He approached the bench, his movements slow and non-threatening. The young woman flinched, pulling the blanket tighter. Her eyes, wide and fearful, peeking out from beneath a curtain of wet hair. "Excuse me," Leo said, his voice soft, almost a whisper, so as not to startle her. "It's a terrible night out here. I had some extra food, and this scarf. It's been in the lost and found for a while. Thought it might keep you warm." He offered the sandwich, wrapped in a napkin, and the scarf, its color a stark contrast to the dreary night. The woman hesitated, her gaze fixed on the sandwich, then on his kind, gentle face. Slowly, tentatively. Her hand reached out, trembling slightly as she took the offering. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice hoarse, barely audible above the wind. "Thank you so much." Her fingers, raw and red from the cold, clutched the warm scarf as if it were a lifeline. Leo nodded, a small, empathetic smile touching his lips. He sat down briefly on the edge of the bench, ignoring the cold and the rain. Do you like to read?" he asked, his voice still gentle. From his jacket pocket, he produced a small, well-loved paperback copy of The Little Prince, a story of enduring friendship and understanding. "It's a good book. Sometimes, a story can make a cold night feel a little less lonely." He offered it to her. Her eyes, which had held so much fear, widened slightly, a flicker of surprise in their depths. She took the book, her fingers tracing the worn cover. "Thank you," she whispered again, a tear mingling with the rainwater on her cheek. "You're very kind." Leo didn't linger. He simply offered another small, reassuring nod, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet understanding that transcended words. He didn't ask her name, didn't preach, didn't seek gratitude. He simply offered a moment of unexpected warmth, a tiny beacon of human connection in the desolate night. He rose quietly, his jacket already soaked through, and melted back into the shadows of the alley, leaving her with the warmth of the scarf, the sustenance of the sandwich, and the quiet promise of a story. His action was driven by a deep, innate compassion, a silent testament to his profound generosity, even in his own scarcity. He didn't need recognition. The act itself was its own reward. Back in his apartment, the warmth of the dry air felt almost alien after the biting cold. He shivered, then rubbed his hands together, his fingers still feeling the faint chill. As he peeled off his jacket, his hand instinctively went to his neck, touching the simple, silver locket he always wore. It was worn smooth with age, the intricate etching of a small, stylized rose, almost entirely faded from years of unconscious caresses. He often touched it, his gaze distant, lost in a vague, fragmented memory of a lullaby or a soft voice that lingered at the edges of his consciousness, but always remained out of reach. He unclasped it, the tiny hinge stiff with age. Inside, nestled beneath a thin layer of protective plastic, was a faded, blurry photograph. It was a picture of an older woman, her face gentle, with eyes that seemed to mirror his own, though her features were soft, almost ethereal. The omniscient narrator could perceive the vague familiarity that might stir in the reader, a fleeting sense that this woman, somehow, was not entirely a stranger. Yet her identity remained shrouded in the mists of Leo's lost childhood. The locket was his only tangible link to a past he couldn't fully recall, a whisper of a family he never knew. He closed the locket, securing it around his neck once more. His eyes drifted to a specific shelf in the bookstore below, visible through a narrow gap in the floorboards, a tiny sliver of his world that connected him to the shop. On that shelf, nestled among less remarkable volumes, was a rare first edition of A Tale of Two Cities. Its pages were slightly yellowed, its binding exquisitely crafted, a treasure in the otherwise humble collection. He would sometimes find himself drawn to it, his hand reaching out to touch its cover, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor running through his fingers. There was no rational explanation for this pull, but a deep, unarticulated connection seemed to emanate from its aged pages, hinting at a secret, unspoken link to a past he didn't fully grasp. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible detail. Yet the omniscient observer understood its significance, a quiet clue, waiting to be discovered. Despite his quiet demeanor and the outward simplicity of his life, there was an uncommon resilience in Leo's eyes. They were deep-set, thoughtful, and though they often held a trace of melancholy, there was also an unyielding spark, a silent strength forged by unknown trials and a quiet determination to survive, to endure, to find meaning even in his solitude. He was an orphan, a lone wolf in a bustling city, but his spirit, though hidden, was unyielding. This quiet existence, this peaceful routine, was the quiet before the storm. Unbeknownst to Leo, the forces that had shaped his past were about to converge with the present, shattering his world and revealing a truth far more extraordinary than any story he could find in his beloved books. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would redefine his identity, his lineage, and his very future. The morning after the rainstorm brought with it a brittle, false calm. Sunlight, weak and watery, struggled to pierce the persistent gray of the city sky. Leo Maxwell, still a little chilled from his late-night act of kindness, went about his routine at the written word with his usual quiet diligence. He dusted shelves, reorganized sections, and meticulously arranged new arrivals. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the familiar aroma of aging paper, creating a comforting cocoon around him. Yet, a subtle unease prickled at the edges of his consciousness, a vague sense of impending change that he couldn't quite pinpoint. His thoughts drifted, as they often did, to Mr. Alistair Finch, the reclusive owner of the building, and indeed, a significant portion of the city's older, more historic properties, had passed away unexpectedly just days prior. The news had been plastered across every local paper: Alistair Finch, reclusive tycoon, dies at 88, vast fortune undistributed. Speculation ran rampant through the city's hushed circles about the fate of his immense, uninherited wealth. Finch had been a ghost, a name on a lease, a distant, almost mythical figure to Leo. He rarely visited the bookstore, preferring his solitude, and Leo had always dealt with a faceless property management company. Still, an elderly man's death, especially one of such stature, always cast a long shadow. Leo simply hoped the new owner would be as indifferent, allowing him to continue his quiet work. The quiet of the late morning was shattered not by a sudden noise, but by a presence. A sleek, black luxury sedan, startlingly out of place on the narrow cobbled street of old businesses, purred to a stop directly outside the bookstore. Leo, engrossed in carefully placing a rare first edition of a collection of classic poems, felt an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. The air inside the shop, usually so still and imbued with the gentle essence of bygone eras, suddenly felt charged, hostile. The car door opened with a soft thud, and out stepped a figure that seemed carved from the city's underbelly of power and corruption. This was Detective Sergeant Victor Thorne. He was a man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored, expensive suit that strained slightly across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp, and his eyes, a cold, piercing blue, seemed to miss nothing. He moved with an almost predatory grace, an aura of menace radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Thorne was a name whispered with a mixture of fear and disdain in the city's smaller neighborhoods. His reputation preceded him a notoriously corrupt officer, known for shaking down struggling small businesses, intimidating residents, and bending the law to his own lucrative will. He was the epitome of abuse of power, a shadow figure who operated with impunity, shielded by his badge and a network of equally unscrupulous allies. Thorne paused at the threshold of the written word, his gaze sweeping over the dusty shelves, the stacks of used books, and finally settling on Leo. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face, a sneer that promised trouble. Well. Thorne's voice was a low growl, laced with a mocking warmth that sent an immediate chill down Leo's spine. It was the voice of a predator assessing its prey. So this is the written word. Bit of a relic, isn't it? Leo, though unnerved, forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He straightened from his task, wiping his hands on his apron. Can I help you, officer? Thorne strolled further into the shop, his expensive shoes clicking unnervingly loud on the worn wooden floorboards. He ran a gloved finger along a dusty shelf, then held it up, a theatrical look of disgust on his face. Officer O, much more than that. Son, Detective Sergeant Thorne. And yes, you can help me. You see, we have a little situation here. He stopped directly in front of Leo, his presence large and overwhelming in the confined space. Effective immediately, the lease for this establishment, and indeed, the entire building, is being terminated. Leo felt a sharp, disbelieving jolt. Terminated, but why, I've always paid my rent on time. The property management never mentioned any issues. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Property management. Oh, they're out of the picture now. Kid. See, the old man, Finch, finally kicked the bucket, and I, among others, am now involved in the disposition of his assets. He paused, letting that sink in, a predatory glint in his eye. Turns out, this place is riddled with unpaid dues, significant ones. I might add, and a charming array of code violations, fire hazards, structural integrity issues, you name it, all conveniently discovered. Of course, now that old man Finch isn't around to sign off on his generous blind eye. His words were vague, deliberately so, but the implication was clear. These were fabricated accusations, conjured to strong-arm Leo out. Leo's mind reeled. Unpaid dues, code violations. It was impossible. He was meticulous with his records, and the building, while old, was structurally sound. But that's not true, he stammered, his voice betraying a hint of his mounting fear. I have all my receipts, and the building passed inspection just last year. Thorne merely smiled, a predatory flash of teeth. Details. The law, son, is a very flexible thing, especially when you know how to bend it, and I know how to bend it. You, on the other hand, you're just a kid running a dusty old bookshop, a poor orphan, aren't you? His tone was overtly menacing, dripping with gloating satisfaction as he emphasized Leo's vulnerability. No family to vouch for you, no connections to pull strings, just you and your little stack of paper dreams. And now, you're losing even that. The bookstore, his sanctuary, his entire world. The thought of losing it sent a wave of icy despair through Leo. It wasn't just a place of work. It was the only constant in his life, the only thread connecting him to a sense of stability. The injustice of it all, the sheer, brazen audacity of Thorne's lies, sparked a flicker of fire within him, a dormant defiance that had long been suppressed by years of cautious living and a pervasive sense of powerlessness. His hands, usually so steady when repairing delicate pages, clenched at his sides, a barely visible tremor running through them. He felt the familiar, aching weight of being a small, insignificant cog in a vast, indifferent machine, but this time, the stakes were too high. This wasn't just an inconvenience, It was an existential threat. Thorne, sensing Leo's internal struggle, decided to push further to ensure his complete capitulation. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "Now, here's how this is going to go. You vacate the premises by the end of the week. No fuss, no arguments, no trying to prove anything. Just pack your little sentimental trinkets and go. If you do that, we can keep things clean. You walk away, a little poorer, a little wiser, but free." He straightened, his gaze hardening. "However," Thorne continued, his voice now devoid of any pretense of false politeness, "if you decide to dig your heels in, if you decide to fight this, well, let's just say I have a lot of resources. I can ensure you face some very serious legal trouble. We can find a few witnesses to those code violations, perhaps even discover some interesting discrepancies in your finances. Petty theft, perhaps fraud, or maybe even something more serious. Something that lands a poor orphan like you behind bars, and without anyone to speak for you, who's going to believe your side of the story." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was a clear, unambiguous warning: comply or face ruin, potentially even incarceration. Thorne was not just threatening his livelihood, he was threatening his freedom, his very existence. He was exploiting Leo's vulnerable status as an orphan, emphasizing his utter lack of protection or family, making him an easy target. The insidious nature of the corruption, its ability to twist the law to its own nefarious ends, hit Leo with full force. His mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and indignation. The bookstore was everything. It was his home, his passion, his last connection to a life that felt meaningful. And now, this corrupt officer, this viper in a tailored suit, was trying to snatch it all away, simply because he could. The thought of being framed, of losing his freedom, of disappearing into the merciless maw of the legal system, was terrifying. He felt the familiar ache of powerlessness, the crushing weight of being an orphan, alone against the world. But then, as Thorne's gloating smile widened, something shifted within Leo. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but a spark of fury ignited in its place. He had lived his life quietly, avoiding conflict, simply trying to survive. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a direct assault on his dignity, on everything he held dear. He thought of the young homeless woman, the scarf, the book. He hadn't fought for recognition then, but he had acted out of a deep-seated belief in kindness and fairness. He couldn't betray that belief now. He couldn't simply give up. His gaze hardened, meeting Thorne's cold eyes with a newfound resolve. The tremor in his hands stilled. He might be an orphan, he might be poor, and he might be alone, but he was not helpless. He knew this wasn't just about a bookstore anymore. It was about standing up to injustice, the silent, unassuming book restorer. The lonely orphan had reached his point of no return. He would fight. He had to. The quiet storm was finally ready to break. The oppressive calm of the previous days shattered with the screech of tires and the aggressive slam of car doors. The morning light, usually a gentle friend to the written word, now felt harsh, exposing every mote of dust dancing in the air, every worn edge of a beloved book. Detective Sergeant Victor Thorne, his face set in a grim, almost gleeful mask of authority, strode towards the bookstore, followed by two uniformed officers. They moved with a menacing efficiency, their heavy boots clunking on the old cobblestones, announcing their destructive intent. Leo Maxwell, who had spent a restless night wrestling with the impossibility of his situation, watched them approach from inside, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The quiet sanctuary he had built was about to be desecrated. "Open up, kid," Thorne's voice boomed, devoid of the mocking civility he had used yesterday. "Eviction order. We're here to clear this place out. Now." He gestured curtly to his officers, who immediately moved to the entrance, their faces impassive as they began to pry open the old oak door, ignoring Leo's presence. Leo rushed forward, his hands instinctively reaching out as if to physically stop them. "Wait, you can't just... This isn't right, I haven't even had a chance to appeal." His voice was thin, reedy, a stark contrast to the booming authority of Thorn. But his eyes, though wide with desperation, held a flicker of the defiance that had ignited within him. Thorn merely smirked, stepping inside. The officers roughly pushed past Leo, their heavy hands already tearing books from shelves, tossing them carelessly into large, industrial-sized bins. The sight was a physical blow to Leo. Each thud of a falling book, each rip of a delicate page, felt like a strike against his own flesh. He watched, heartbroken, as decades of carefully curated literary history were reduced to discarded refuse. He saw a first edition of a beloved classic slam into a bin, its spine cracking. He cried out, a strangled sound of protest. "Hey, be careful," Leo pleaded, tears pricking at his eyes. "Those are valuable. They're fragile." He tried to intervene, to grab a tumbling stack, but one of the officers roughly shoved him aside. Thorn watched the chaos with a detached, almost bored expression, a small smile playing on his lips. He enjoyed this, the public display of power, the breaking of a spirit. He felt a perverse satisfaction in witnessing the poor orphan squirm. This was his territory, his rules. Leo, seeing the destruction intensify, abandoned the futile attempts to stop the officers from destroying the collection. His focus shifted to the truly irreplaceable items, the books that held sentimental value, the personal effects he had amassed over years of solitary living in the apartment above. He darted between the officers, trying to salvage the small, worn box where he kept his meager mementos, the stack of meticulously repaired volumes that were ready for sale, the tools of his trade. He moved with a quiet, desperate intensity, his hands grabbing at anything he could. "Get out of the way, kid," Thorn barked, suddenly annoyed by Leo's persistent efforts. He stepped forward, grabbing Leo's arm with a powerful, bruising grip. "I said clear out. Everything in this shop is property of the estate now. You touch one more thing, and I'll have you arrested for theft." He gave Leo a hard shove, sending him stumbling backward. The force of the push was unexpected. Leo lost his footing, tripping over a stack of discarded encyclopedias. He fell with a sickening thud, hitting his head against a low bookshelf. The small, worn box he was clutching flew from his hands, spilling its contents across the dusty wooden floor. His meticulously mended books scattered, their fragile pages fanning out like fallen birds. And then, with a soft clatter, the simple silver locket he always wore around his neck, wrenched from its chain by the impact, skittered across the floorboards. Its ancient clasp, weakened by age and the sudden force, broke open. The faded, blurry photograph inside lay exposed, face up, on the dusty floorboards. At that precise moment, the front door of The Written Word opened again. Not with a forceful slam, but with a quiet click. Eleanor Vance, a kind, elderly legal aid lawyer, stepped cautiously into the shop. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, and her kind eyes, though slightly tired, missed nothing. She possessed a quiet, dignified demeanor that belied a razor-sharp legal mind. Eleanor had been making her rounds in the neighborhood, investigating persistent rumors of Thorn's aggressive tactics against local businesses and the suspicious handling of Mr. Alistair Finch's sprawling estate. The commotion, the shouting, and the sight of books being tossed out had drawn her here. Her presence was a silent, unexpected interruption to Thorn's carefully choreographed show of force. Thorn, his back initially to the door, turned at the sudden quiet. His eyes, sweeping over the scene, landed on the small, broken locket on the floor, its faded photograph starkly visible. His sneer vanished. His face, usually a mask of arrogant control, froze. A flicker of profound shock, then a terrifying, dawning realization, stretched his features taut, The woman in the photo. It was his mother. His eyes darted to the unique, almost identical silver locket he knew from childhood. A prized family heirloom, a gift from his mother. A matching locket, he recalled, to the one she had given away so long ago. The air seemed to leave his lungs in a sudden, sharp gasp. The world tilted on its axis. He had seen that locket before, in old, forgotten photo albums. He had even, as a child, briefly glimpsed a similar one on his mother's neck before she stopped wearing it. He knew the distinct, stylized rose etching, and the woman in the photo, his mother, taken decades ago, younger, vibrant. And then, his gaze shot to Leo, sprawled on the floor, his face bruised from the fall, but with eyes that held a haunting familiarity. It couldn't be. Not him. Not here. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a cold, sickening wave of understanding. This was the secret his mother had carried, the reason for her long silences and distant gazes. This was the long-lost connection, the ghost of his own past. Eleanor Vance, her keen lawyer's eyes observing everything, saw the locket and the photograph on the floor. She saw Thorne's sudden, uncharacteristic pallor, the way his body visibly stiffened, the sheer, naked terror that flashed in his cold blue eyes. Her mind, accustomed to piecing together fragmented evidence, made an immediate, crucial connection. She had heard rumors of Alistair Finch's estranged family, hushed whispers of a child given away, a family secret buried deep. And now, this locket. Thorne's reaction. It was all beginning to click into place. Thorne, desperate, reacted instinctively. "Don't touch that!" he roared, his voice cracking slightly, his usual menace replaced by a panicked urgency. He lunged forward, not towards Leo, but towards the locket, his hand outstretched, trying to snatch it from the floor. His composure had utterly deserted him. "This is trespassing. You're fabricating stories. This is all nonsense." He tried to dismiss the locket's significance, to make it seem like a meaningless trinket. He wheeled on his officers, his voice rising in pitch. "Hurry up! Get rid of everything now and get this nuisance out of here." He pointed at Leo with a trembling finger, his eyes wild. His usual bravado was visibly shaken, revealing a deep-seated fear that had finally broken through his carefully constructed facade. Then, he turned his furious, terrified gaze on Eleanor. "And you, old woman, mind your own business. This is a private matter. Get out of here before you find yourself in trouble." His attempts at intimidation, usually so effective, lacked their usual conviction. His voice trembled, his eyes darted nervously, betraying his deep internal turmoil. Eleanor, however, stood her ground, her gaze firm, unwavering. She had witnessed enough. The sight of Thorne, a man known for his unflappable cruelty, reduced to this panicked, desperate state, confirmed her suspicions. She had seen the locket, seen the photo, and seen the raw, undeniable terror in his eyes. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a truth far more complex and shocking than she had ever imagined. This was no mere eviction. This was a desperate cover-up. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had to help Leo Maxwell. The fate of the bookstore, and perhaps much more, hung in the balance. The aftermath of the bookstore confrontation left Leo Maxwell reeling, yet strangely resolute. The brutal efficiency with which Thorne's officers had ravaged his sanctuary, coupled with the detective's uncharacteristic panic at the sight of the locket, had solidified a terrifying truth: this was personal, and it was tied to something far deeper than unpaid rent. The chaos had been unbearable, the loss palpable, but the unexpected appearance of Eleanor Vance, a beacon of calm amidst the storm, offered a fragile thread of hope. She had intervened, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to Thorne's bluster, and her sharp eyes had missed nothing. Eleanor, wasting no time, ushered a dazed Leo out of the wreckage of his shop. The bookstore, once a haven, now looked like a war zone. Books strewn, shelves overturned. Thorne, recovering his composure, had barked orders for the demolition to proceed, setting an ominous deadline 48 hours. This urgent deadline, publicly declared, loomed over them like a guillotine, threatening to erase any remaining physical evidence and sever Leo's last tangible connection to his past. "We need to move quickly. Leo," Eleanor said, her voice firm but kind, as they huddled in a small, bustling coffee shop across the street. The scent of espresso and sugar felt alien after the dust and despair of the bookstore. What happened in there, what Thorne said, and his reaction to that locket, it's critical. Tell me everything. Leo, still trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, recounted the sparse details of his childhood being found abandoned, raised in a series of foster homes. The locket, his only constant. He described the faded photograph, the vague sense of a missing past. Eleanor listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had been investigating Alistair Finch's death for weeks, drawn by the unusual circumstances of his immense, unclaimed wealth and whispers of a forgotten family. Thorne's sudden involvement in the estate, combined with his reputation for corruption, had raised every one of her professional hackles. "There have been whispers, Leo," Eleanor confided, her voice low. "Rumors of an estranged child, a family secret kept tightly under wraps. Finch was a notoriously private man, and Thorne, he's been aggressively consolidating control over Finch's smaller assets, strong-arming tenants, rushing through paperwork." It didn't make sense for a detective sergeant to be so deeply involved in a civil estate unless there was something significant to gain, or something to hide. Her eyes gleamed with a lawyer's keen insight. "Your locket, his reaction. This isn't just about a lease. This is about inheritance. And I believe Victor Thorne is more deeply connected to Alistair Finch than anyone knows. And perhaps, so are you." The realization hit Leo with the force of a physical blow. Inheritance him. An orphan with nothing but a used bookstore, suddenly connected to a reclusive tycoon. It was too outlandish, a plot ripped from one of his own novels. Yet, Thorne's panicked face, the desperate scramble for the locket, it made a horrifying, unsettling sense. Eleanor, sensing his shock, pressed on. "We need to prepare. Thorne is powerful. He has connections. He'll try to nullify your claim, discredit you. He'll leverage his influence to make sure this preliminary hearing goes his way." The hearing was scheduled for the next day, a mere 24 hours after the eviction notice. Thorne, leveraging his connections, had pushed for an expedited process, aiming to catch Leo off guard and steamroll any potential claims before substantial evidence could be gathered. The stage was set in the city courthouse, specifically in the probate court, an arena usually reserved for dry legalities. But now, a symbolic battleground for a hidden legacy. This was the very place where Thorne hoped to assert his power, solidify his control over Finch's assets, and permanently silence Leo. Eleanor, though a brilliant and ethical lawyer, was severely outmatched. Her small legal aid firm lacked the vast resources of Thorne's network. Thorne had already started sowing seeds of doubt, spreading insidious rumors about Leo's character, that he was a con artist, an opportunist trying to exploit the deceased Finch's estate. He had even managed to plant minor incriminating evidence in the debris of the bookstore, a falsified overdue notice, a doctored invoice, small details designed to paint Leo as irresponsible and untrustworthy, further discrediting him. Potential witnesses who might have spoken to Thorne's aggressive tactics were mysteriously unavailable, or simply too afraid to come forward. The judge presiding over the hearing, a man known for his adherence to strict legal procedure, was already leaning towards a quick dismissal of Leo's claims, viewing them as baseless assertions from a struggling tenant. "We don't have much time," Eleanor said, her voice tight with urgency. "Thorne's got an injunction for demolition on that bookstore. He's pushing it through to happen within 48 hours. He wants to destroy any chance of finding physical evidence, any link to your past there. The deadline was a ticking clock, adding immense pressure, threatening to erase the truth and solidify Thorne's victory before Leo could gather irrefutable proof. The thought of his beloved bookstore, his last connection to a life he understood, being reduced to rubble, spurred Leo into a frantic state of mind. That night, in Eleanor's cramped but cozy office, Leo worked tirelessly. Eleanor, true to her reputation, was a formidable advocate, but the odds were stacked against them. She prepared legal arguments, researched inheritance laws, and dug into Finch's opaque past. Leo, however, felt a deeper, more personal urgency. He felt a profound isolation. Despite Eleanor's support, he was facing this battle largely alone, against a powerful, corrupt system, and a man who seemed to have unlimited influence. He spent hours examining the locket, turning the faded photograph over and over in his mind. The woman's eyes, so like his own, haunted him. Who was she? Why did Thorne react that way? His gaze kept returning to the image of the rare first edition of A Tale of Two Cities he had instinctively touched in the bookstore. That book. There was something about it. A faint memory. A whisper of a familiar scent. A feeling of significance. It was illogical. But his intuition, honed by years of deciphering subtle clues in neglected texts, screamed at him. He remembered the tremor in his hand when he touched it, the strange pull he felt towards its yellowed pages. Could a book, his beloved sanctuary, hold a clue to his past? Driven by a desperate hope, and against Eleanor's advice to focus on legal strategy, Leo decided to revisit the bookstore. He slipped past the police tape, his heart pounding, and entered the ruined shop. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust and broken dreams. He moved with a quiet reverence through the wreckage, navigating overturned shelves and scattered volumes. His fingers, still nimble despite the dust and debris, searched. He remembered the specific shelf, the faint indent where the book had sat for years. He found it, miraculously untouched amidst the chaos, the first edition of A Tale of Two Cities. He opened it, his hands trembling. He had read this book countless times, but never with this kind of desperate intent. He carefully leafed through the brittle pages, searching for something, anything. And then, there it was. Not a hidden compartment, or a coded message, but something far more subtle. A detail only a book restorer, with his meticulous eye for print and binding, would notice. On a specific page, usually overlooked, a small, barely visible mark, almost like a faint smudge of ink, stood out. It was near a passage about hidden identities and surprising revelations. And beneath it, a delicate, almost invisible inscription, not part of the original printing, etched into the very fiber of the paper, a tiny, stylized rose, identical to the one on his locket. And then, a faint, almost microscopic set of initials, A, F, and L, M, and a date, 30 years prior. And then, a final, almost impossible to decipher, set of numbers, etched into the paper itself, a unique sequence that seemed to correspond to a genetic marker. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the broken windows. The ink smudge wasn't ink at all. It was a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration that seemed to match the small, distinct birthmark on his own inner forearm, a birthmark he had always dismissed as insignificant. The rose, the initials, the date, the genetic marker, it was all coming together. Alistair Finch, L, M. His initials, and the birthmark. His mother's face in the locket, with similar eyes. A truth, long buried, began to surface from the depths of his forgotten past. He immediately called Eleanor, his voice urgent, breathless. "Eleanor, I found something. In the book. It confirms everything. I need to show you." Eleanor, though skeptical about his book clue, rushed to meet him, sensing the profound shift in his demeanor. He showed her the locket, now re-examined under a powerful magnifying glass, revealing an even fainter, almost microscopic inscription on its inner rim, a small, almost imperceptible symbol, identical to the one in the book, and another set of initials, V.T. Thorn. V.T. Victor Thorn. Eleanor gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Leo, if this is what I think it is, if Finch had another son, and if Thorn is... Her voice trailed off, the implications staggering. The corrupt officer, relentlessly trying to destroy Leo, might be his own long-lost brother. The dramatic irony was crushing, a cruel twist of fate. The sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows through the broken windows of the bookstore. The 48-hour demolition deadline loomed. They had hours, maybe less, to prepare for the hearing that would determine Leo's fate, and perhaps uncover the truth of a forgotten family, a hidden legacy, and a brother's shocking betrayal. Leo clutched the locket and the book, his only weapons against the formidable power of Victor Thorn. The silence of the night was no longer peaceful, but charged with the thunderous anticipation of a truth about to explode. The air in Probate Courtroom 3 was thick with the scent of polished wood, stale paper, and unspoken tension. Sunlight, filtered through tall, arched windows, fell in dusty shafts across the solemn faces of the spectators and the stern visages of the legal professionals. Every seat was occupied, drawn by the whispers of a sensational case involving the vast, unclaimed fortune of Alistair Finch. For Leo Maxwell, huddled beside Eleanor Vance at the defense table, the room felt like a suffocating cage, the ticking clock on the wall mirroring the rapid approach of the demolition deadline for his beloved bookstore. His silver locket, now reattached to a makeshift chain, lay heavy beneath his shirt, a tangible link to the swirling uncertainty of his past. Detective Sergeant Victor Thorn, impeccable in a dark suit, stood at the prosecutor's podium, radiating an aura of polished menace. His voice, smooth and resonant, filled the courtroom as he laid out his case against Leo. He presented fabricated documents, doctored financial records from the bookstore, and even produced a witness, a grizzled, shifty-eyed man Thorn had clearly coerced, who testified to seeing Leo loitering suspiciously near Finch's properties in the weeks before his death. Thorn's narrative was a meticulously crafted tapestry of lies, painting Leo as nothing more than an opportunistic con artist, preying on the death of a reclusive millionaire. "Your Honor," Thorn declared, his voice ringing with feigned righteousness, "this young man, Mr. Leo Maxwell, is attempting to exploit the tragic passing of a prominent citizen, Mr. Alistair Finch. He presents no credible claim, merely vague, emotional assertions, supported only by dubious, sentimental items and a fabricated story. He is a squatter, plain and simple, and he should be evicted from the Finch property immediately, with no further delay." He gestured dismissively towards Leo, a smirk playing on his lips, confident in his deception. Eleanor Vance, though battling valiantly, found herself swimming against a powerful current. She presented Leo's genuine receipts, argued against the fabricated code violations, and highlighted Thorn's clear conflict of interest. But the judge, a formidable man named Judge Harrison, known for his strict adherence to procedure, appeared unconvinced. Thorn's polished presentation and his badge carried significant weight, and Eleanor's evidence, though true, seemed circumstantial against the tide of carefully constructed lies. Judge Harrison's gaze often lingered on Thorn, a subtle sign of deference to authority. "Your Honor," Eleanor countered, her voice firm despite the strain, "we believe Detective Sergeant Thorn has a personal stake in this case, a connection to the Finch estate that he has failed to disclose. And Mr. Maxwell's claim, while unconventional, speaks to a deeply personal truth." Thorn scoffed, a loud, theatrical sound. "Objection. Your Honor, counsel is speculating wildly. This is a baseless attempt to distract from the facts and slander a decorated officer." Judge Harrison nodded. Sustained. Ms. Vance, please stick to the evidence. We are running out of time. His tone was sharp, indicating his patience was wearing thin. The demolition order for the bookstore loomed, a tangible threat. Leo watched Eleanor, his heart sinking with each strained argument, each raised objection. He felt the familiar ache of powerlessness, the crushing weight of being alone against a system that seemed designed to protect the powerful. Thorne's eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto his, a triumphant glint in their cold blue depths. The corrupt officer seemed to revel in Leo's quiet despair. This was it. The judge was about to rule. His life, his last connection to a past he couldn't recall, was about to be obliterated. But then, a surge of adrenaline, cold and clear, coursed through Leo. He thought of the locket, nestled against his skin. He thought of the words in the old book, the tiny, almost invisible inscription, the genetic marker. He thought of Eleanor, fighting for him when no one else would. And he thought of the young homeless woman, the scarf, the book. He wouldn't let Thorne win. Not like this. Not by erasing him. He leaned towards Eleanor, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Eleanor, I need to speak. Now. Eleanor, surprised by the newfound steel in his voice, hesitated for only a second, then nodded. Your Honor, she said, rising again. My client, Mr. Maxwell, requests to make a brief statement. He has crucial evidence to present. Thorne scoffed again. Your Honor, this is a desperate delay tactic. More sentimental nonsense, I presume. Judge Harrison sighed, clearly exasperated. Mr. Maxwell, this better be pertinent. I am moments away from making a ruling. Leo rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He walked to the witness stand, his gait steady, his head held high. He looked at the judge, then at Thorne, whose face was a mask of contemptuous amusement. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, punctuated only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Every eye was on him. Your Honor, Leo began, his voice surprisingly clear, resonating with a quiet conviction that commanded attention. I understand this court deals in facts, in evidence, and I assure you, what I am about to present is nothing less than the truth. He paused, his hand instinctively going to his chest, touching the locket beneath his shirt. I am an orphan. I grew up with nothing but this locket, my only link to a past I couldn't remember. He unclasped the locket, his fingers moving with practiced ease, and held it up for the judge to see. The faded photograph inside, though blurry, was clearly visible. This is my mother, Leo stated, his voice softening slightly, a profound melancholy in his eyes. And this locket? It was hers, a unique family heirloom. He described the faint, stylized rose etching on its silver surface. Thorne snorted, a derisive sound. A cheap trinket. Your Honor, millions of people have lockets. Perhaps, Leo conceded, his gaze unwavering as he met Thorne's eyes. But not this one, and not with what it contains, and what it points to. He then pulled out the rare first edition of A Tale of Two Cities, its worn cover a familiar comfort in his hands. This book, Your Honor, belonged to Mr. Alistair Finch. It was in my bookstore for years, and within its pages, a secret was hidden. He opened the book to the specific page, the one with the subtle, almost invisible inscription. He passed it to the bailiff, who then delivered it to the judge. Judge Harrison peered at it, his brow furrowed. Your Honor, Leo continued, on this page, near a passage about hidden identities, is a faint inscription, a stylized rose, identical to the one on my locket. And then, the initials A.F. for Alistair Finch, and LM for Leo Maxwell, and a date, 30 years ago, the year I was born. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Thorne's confident smirk began to waver, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of unease. He shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowed, fixed on Leo. "And finally," Leo said, his voice rising, imbued with a quiet, undeniable power. "There is a sequence of numbers, almost microscopically etched into the paper itself, a unique genetic marker." This was the bated breath moment. Thorne, sensing the imminent danger, stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. Sentimental nonsense. He's trying to manufacture a connection where there is none. Birthmarks, genetic markers. This is pure fabrication." His voice was loud, but it lacked its usual authoritative ring, betraying a rising panic. "Is it Detective Sergeant Thorne?" Leo countered, his gaze locking directly onto Thorne's, an almost unnerving calm in his eyes. "Or is it the truth you've so desperately tried to bury?" With a deliberate movement, Leo pushed up the sleeve of his shirt, revealing his inner forearm. There, clearly visible on his skin, was a small, distinct mark. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration that seemed to match the ink smudge in the book. "This, Your Honor," Leo said, pointing to the mark, "is a birthmark, a unique one, and its pattern, its very genetic sequence, matches the numbers subtly etched in this book. A code, left by Alistair Finch, to identify his long-lost son. To identify me." A collective, stunned gasp swept through the courtroom. The judge, who had been leaning forward, eyes narrowed in scrutiny, suddenly recoiled, his gaze snapping from Leo's arm to Thorne's ashen face. His eyes widened in shock, comprehension dawning like a horrifying sunrise. Thorne's face, which moments before had been contorted by outrage, now went ashen. His smug expression utterly evaporated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked at Leo's birthmark, then at his own arm, a lightning-fast glance revealing a faint, almost identical mark hidden beneath his expensive cuff. The truth, raw and undeniable, crashed down on him. The locket, the mother, the book, the birthmark, it all connected. He wasn't just related to Leo, he was his long-lost brother, the very man he had so ruthlessly persecuted, the poor orphan he had gloated over, was his own flesh and blood, the rightful heir to the fortune he had coveted, the ultimate betrayal. His eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an escape, but there was nowhere to hide. His entire scheme, built on lies and cruelty, was collapsing around him. Eleanor Vance, who had watched in growing awe, felt a silent gasp escape her lips. Her eyes, wide with dawning realization, brimmed with tears of fierce pride and profound satisfaction. She had suspected a connection, but the depth of it, the shocking familial link between the victim and his oppressor, was beyond anything she could have imagined. The courtroom erupted. Whispers exploded into excited murmurs, then a rising tide of shouts and gasps. "His brother!" Someone cried. "The corrupt officer is his brother." The revelation of a corrupt officer's betrayal of his own long-lost brother. A betrayal rooted in greed and the systematic abuse of power, was almost too much for the room to bear. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down repeatedly, the sound echoing through the chaotic room, demanding order, his own face pale with shock. The dramatic irony was crushing, a cruel twist of fate that resonated with every witness. Leo stood at the witness stand, his composure unwavering amidst the pandemonium. His eyes, though filled with a profound sadness at the revelation of his brother's treachery, also held a deep, quiet triumph. His victory was not just a legal one. It was a profound familial reconnection, a stunning, unforeseen reversal of fortunes. The humble orphan, once dismissed and threatened, now stood as the undeniable heir, his truth vindicated, his past finally unveiled. The catharsis was overwhelming. a tidal wave of emotions washing over the courtroom, confirming the triumph of long-buried truth over insidious deceit. The resounding crash of Judge Harrison's gavel struggled to pierce the stunned cacophony that had erupted in Probate Courtroom 3. The revelation of Detective Sergeant Victor Thorne as Leo Maxwell's long-lost brother, coupled with the undeniable proof of his familial link to the deceased Alistair Finch, had thrown the proceedings into pandemonium. Gasps, shouts, and the frenzied clicking of reporters' cameras filled the air as the weight of the astonishing truth settled upon every witness. The atmosphere, once tense with legal formality, now crackled with the raw electricity of a family drama intertwined with a shocking tale of corruption and betrayal. Detective Sergeant Victor Thorne's world imploded in that instant. His face, a mask of terror and disbelief, went utterly slack as two uniformed officers, acting on an immediate, unspoken directive from the visibly shaken judge, moved swiftly towards him. He offered no resistance, his arrogance completely deflated, replaced by the profound, soul-crushing realization of his own ruin. He, the man who had so confidently wielded power and intimidation, now stood exposed, a common criminal caught in his own web of deceit. His badge, a symbol of authority he had so shamelessly abused, was stripped from his uniform with a sharp, symbolic tear. The handcuffs clicked shut, echoing loudly in the suddenly quieting courtroom. He was immediately arrested for corruption, abuse of power, attempted fraud, and obstruction of justice. News crews, having descended upon the courthouse like vultures, captured every humiliating detail. His reputation, meticulously built on a foundation of fear and illicit gain, was utterly destroyed, replaced by public disgrace and the indelible stain of familial betrayal. The subsequent investigation into Thorne's activities was swift and merciless. Under the direct scrutiny of Judge Harrison and a newly assembled task force, a decade-long pattern of bribery, extortion, and fraudulent dealings was meticulously unearthed. The vast sums of wealth he had amassed illegally, often through the very strong-arming tactics he had used against Leo, were seized. Witnesses, previously intimidated into silence, now came forward, emboldened by Thorne's spectacular fall. His fate was sealed a long prison sentence, a just recompense for his avarice and the cruelty he had inflicted, particularly upon his own flesh and blood. The poetic justice of his downfall, losing everything by attempting to steal from his own brother, was a powerful cautionary tale that reverberated through the city's legal and law enforcement circles. For Eleanor Vance, the resolution brought a profound sense of vindication. Her unwavering integrity, her quiet persistence in investigating Thorne's suspicious activities, was now publicly lauded. Her small legal aid firm, often overlooked and underfunded, suddenly found itself deluged with support. Donations poured in, and the city council, chastened by the scandal, allocated significant funding to her organization, allowing her to expand her services and help countless more disadvantaged individuals. She received a formal, public apology from the local bar association, acknowledging their prior dismissals of her concerns about Thorne's unethical conduct. Eleanor, modest as ever, accepted the recognition with grace, her focus immediately shifting to how she could leverage this newfound support to further her mission of justice for the vulnerable. She had believed in Leo when no one else would, and her unwavering faith had been instrumental in uncovering the truth. Leo Maxwell's world had been turned upside down, but from the ashes of his destroyed bookstore, a new reality bloomed, one of immense possibility and profound meaning. He was officially recognized as the rightful heir to Alistair Finch's vast estate. The inheritance was staggering the bookstore building, numerous other properties scattered across the city, and a substantial financial fortune that ensured his security for generations. This inheritance was not merely material wealth, it was a profound opportunity. It granted him the resources to pursue his lifelong dreams, to safeguard the bookstore, and, perhaps most importantly, to establish initiatives that would help others avoid the very injustices he had faced. He was no longer the struggling orphan, he was a man of means, poised to become a benevolent and powerful figure in the city. In the days and weeks that followed, Leo found himself navigating a dizzying new reality. He met with estate lawyers, financial advisors, and architects. His quiet apartment above the bookstore, once a sanctuary, now felt like a temporary waypoint. Yet, amidst the flurry of activity, he sought out the one person who had stood by him, who had seen past his unassuming exterior. He found Eleanor Vance in her small, cluttered office, poring over legal documents. The scent of old paper, so familiar from his bookstore, filled the air. She looked up, her tired eyes softening as she saw him. "Leo," she said, a warm smile gracing her lips. "How are you holding up? It's been quite a whirlwind." Leo sat down across from her, a profound sigh escaping him. "It's surreal, Eleanor. Like a dream. Or perhaps a story I've read 1,000 times, but never thought I'd live." He gestured vaguely. "All of it. The wealth, the properties, and Victor. My brother." The last word hung in the air, heavy with a complex mix of sorrow, shock, and an undeniable sense of loss. Eleanor nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I can only imagine. The human heart is a complex thing. Leo, to find a brother only to find him a villain, it's a heavy burden." She reached across the desk and gently squeezed his hand. "But you chose the path of truth, and that is what matters. You chose justice, even when it meant exposing someone tied to your own blood." Leo looked at the silver locket, now nestled comfortably in his palm. He had retrieved it from the courtroom, a tangible reminder of the day everything changed. I keep thinking about my mother, and Alistair Finch, all those years. A family secret buried. And Victor, knowing this somehow, using it, turning it into a weapon." His voice was low, tinged with a deep, lingering sadness. He must have known something, or suspected, from the locket. That's why he reacted that way. "Perhaps," Eleanor mused, her eyes thoughtful. "The details of Finch's personal life are still emerging. It seems he was a man burdened by past decisions, by the choices he made. Maybe he tried to make amends in his own way, through that hidden message in the book. And Victor, perhaps, was a secret he tried to control, or appease. But ultimately, his greed consumed him. The inheritance, Leo, was rightfully yours. Finch wanted to make sure it went to the right person, not to someone who would abuse it." Leo looked at the locket again, then at Eleanor. "I don't know what I would have done without you. Eleanor, you saw the truth when no one else did. You fought for me when I had no one." His gratitude was profound, heartfelt. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "It was my duty, Leo, and my privilege. You have a good heart, and now, you have the means to do immense good in this city. This isn't just about money, is it? It's about responsibility, about building something better." Leo nodded, his eyes fixed on the future. "Exactly. The bookstore. I'm going to restore it. Better than ever. Not just as a business, but as a community hub. A place where stories are cherished, and where people can find solace and inspiration. Just like I did." He paused, a new thought forming. "And the inheritance. It won't be wasted. I want to establish something. A foundation. Something that can help people like me. People who have been overlooked, exploited, or who simply need a hand up." Eleanor's eyes lit up with approval. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Leo, you have the heart for it. And now, the resources. I would be honored to help you set that up." Their conversation stretched late into the evening, a contemplative dialogue that cemented their bond. Eleanor, the wise and ethical advocate, became Leo's trusted advisor, guiding him through the complexities of his newfound wealth and helping him navigate the often treacherous waters of philanthropy. Leo, once adrift and alone, had found not only a vast inheritance, but also a true friend, a mentor, and a profound sense of purpose. The new calm that settled upon him was not a quiet resignation, but a peaceful resolve. The calm of a man who had faced his demons, uncovered his past, and was now ready to forge a future, not just for himself, but for his city. The bittersweet reality of his family revelation, the simultaneous joy of finding kin, and the sorrow of his brother's betrayal, added a complex layer to his peace. He was finally, truly, whole. 5 years after the dramatic courtroom revelation, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the comforting aroma of old paper and new beginnings, now permeated the air above the written word. The bookstore, once a dusty relic on a forgotten street, had undergone a profound metamorphosis. Its old oak door, meticulously restored, now swung open freely, inviting a constant stream of visitors. Sunlight, no longer struggling through grimy panes, streamed in through gleaming windows, illuminating refurbished shelves that gleamed with both classic treasures and contemporary narratives. The hum of the old refrigerator in Leo Maxwell's apartment above had been replaced by the lively murmur of conversations, the soft rustle of turning pages, and the occasional burst of laughter from the cafe that now occupied the bookstore's sunlit corner. Leo, no longer the solitary figure hunched over instant noodles, moved through his transformed world with a quiet confidence that radiated purpose. His life, once a stark tableau of isolation, was now a rich tapestry woven with genuine connections and profound impact. His apartment, while still reflecting his understated taste, was no longer sparse. It was filled with the subtle warmth of shared moments, a comfortable sofa where animated discussions about literature unfolded, a collection of framed photographs depicting the bookstore's vibrant community events, and a perpetually open door that welcomed friends and colleagues. His evenings, once spent in silent restoration, now often involved late-night meetings with community leaders, planning new initiatives, or simply sharing a meal with Eleanor Vance, their bond deepened by years of shared purpose. The written word had become more than just a bookstore. It was a thriving community hub, a beacon of learning and connection. It hosted weekly book clubs, literacy workshops for children and adults, and open mic nights where local poets found their voice. The original charm had been meticulously preserved, but every corner now vibrated with a renewed sense of life and possibility. Children sat cross-legged on plush rugs, absorbed in stories, while university students debated philosophy over steaming mugs of chai. It was a place where everyone felt welcome, where knowledge was cherished, and where the simple act of reading became a powerful act of connection. Leo, the quiet book restorer, had fully embraced his new role as a respected philanthropist and community leader. His inherent compassion, once confined to small, unnoticed acts, now had the means to blossom on a grand scale. He had managed his inherited wealth not with ostentation, but with meticulous care and a deep sense of responsibility. He saw it not as personal fortune, but as a resource, a tool to repair the broken pieces of his city, much like he used to mend the frayed pages of a forgotten book. One of his most significant achievements was the establishment of the Finch Maxwell Foundation. This charitable organization, a powerful testament to his family's complex legacy, was dedicated to 2 core missions: combating corruption in local government and providing comprehensive support for vulnerable populations. The foundation funded investigative journalism, offered free legal aid to victims of injustice, and provided grants to grassroots organizations working on transparency and accountability. His personal involvement went far beyond financial contributions. Leo regularly visited homeless shelters, not just to deliver much-needed resources, but to sit and talk, to listen to stories, and to share his own journey of perseverance. He understood the profound despair of feeling unseen, unheard, and his presence offered a unique sense of hope. He would often bring large boxes of books, new and old, donating them to the shelters, knowing that sometimes a story was just as vital as a warm meal. "This used to be me," in a way. He'd once confided to a young man in a shelter, sharing the scarf and the book, a quiet echo of his own save the cat moment. Lost, alone, but a single act of kindness, and then a profound truth, changed everything. You're not alone, and your story matters. The foundation also heavily invested in literacy programs, ensuring that every child in the city, regardless of their socio-economic background, had access to books and the opportunity to learn to read. Mobile libraries, funded by the Finch-Maxwell Foundation, now traverse the city's underserved neighborhoods, bringing the magic of stories directly to eager young hands. Leo believed deeply in the transformative power of literacy, a belief forged in the quiet solitude of his own childhood, where books had been his only companions. His once solitary personal life was now rich with genuine connections. Eleanor Vance had become more than just his legal advisor. She was a cherished friend, a wise confidant, and a surrogate family member. They shared a quiet, unspoken understanding, built on mutual respect and shared values. She often accompanied him on his visits to community centers, her sharp legal mind always ready to offer guidance, but her kind eyes always focusing on the human stories. He had also forged new friendships with local artists, educators, and community activists, forming a diverse network of individuals committed to positive change. The sense of belonging, once an elusive dream, had finally settled upon him, firm and undeniable. He had not only found his past, but had also built a vibrant, meaningful present. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 5 years after the courthouse drama, Leo stood in the heart of the written word. The bookstore was a hive of activity, bathed in the warm glow of custom-designed reading lamps. Children's laughter bubbled up from the reading nook, juxtaposed with the gentle murmur of adults browsing the aisles. He held a new, beautifully bound first edition of a classic novel, perhaps Great Expectations, a fitting tale of unexpected fortunes and moral growth. Its cover was smooth, its pages crisp, a stark contrast to the dilapidated Gatsby he had once painstakingly restored. His hand rested on its cover, a testament to his continued love for the printed word. Beside the book, resting openly on the polished counter, lay his old silver locket. It was no longer tarnished or worn from decades of neglect. Eleanor had found a master jeweler who had painstakingly polished it, restoring its intricate stylized rose etching to its original splendor. The ancient clasp had been delicately repaired, now holding strong. Inside, the faded, blurry photograph of his mother was now a pristine, clear image, lovingly restored by a professional photographer. Her gentle eyes, so like his own, gazed out with a quiet dignity, and nestled beside it, a newer photograph. Recently added a candid shot of Leo and Eleanor, caught mid-laughter, their faces illuminated by the joy of shared purpose. Leo looked at the locket, then at the bustling life around him. The city, once a symbol of his loneliness, was now his vibrant home. He had not only inherited wealth, but had discovered a family he never knew, endured a painful betrayal, and emerged stronger, more connected. The locket, once a symbol of his lost past, now represented his found family, a bridge between two fractured halves of a legacy beautifully restored. It was a tangible reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, the triumph of kindness over cruelty, and the enduring power of truth, even when found in the most unexpected ways. His journey, from a solitary existence to a life of profound impact, encapsulated the essence of a second spring, a vibrant new beginning. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.